Before we dive in, let me know in the comments what country are you watching from? I'd love to see where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Story One. The Carnival Triumph was supposed to be a dream vacation. More than 3,000 passengers boarded the massive cruise ship in February 2013, excited for 4 relaxing days in the Caribbean sun. But instead of paradise, they found themselves trapped in what survivors later called a floating nightmare, a horrifying test of human endurance and sanity. It all began with a small engine fire on February 10th while the ship was sailing through the Gulf of Mexico. At first, no one panicked. There was a little smoke, a brief power outage, and the crew calmly told everyone everything was fine. But as the hours passed, that calm turned to fear. The ship wasn't moving. It was completely dead, drifting aimlessly in the open ocean. There was no power, no air conditioning, and worst of all, no working toilets. Thousands of people were suddenly trapped in a nightmare that would soon be known around the world. As the power stayed off, the ship's sewage system failed completely. Human waste began flooding the lower decks, seeping into rooms and pooling in the hallways. The smell was so overpowering that passengers tied shirts and towels around their faces like makeshift masks. But nothing could block out the thick, nauseating stench that clung to every inch of the ship. The heat became unbearable. Without air conditioning, many cabins turned into suffocating ovens, reaching over 100 degrees. People began panicking. Some said it felt like being buried alive, trapped inside a floating coffin surrounded by endless water. The normal sounds of a cruise, laughter, music, the hum of engines, were replaced by silence, broken only by the crying of children, angry arguments, and the constant dripping of water from broken pipes echoing through the corridors. Within a single day, food started running out. The crew did what they could, handing out cold sandwiches and warm soda, but there wasn't enough for everyone. Lines for food and the few working toilets stretched for hours. People began using hallways, elevators, and even corners of their own cabins when they couldn't hold it any longer. Civilization seemed to vanish as desperation took over. Some passengers broke down crying, others started shouting and fighting over food or bathroom access. The ship was changing, turning from a vacation paradise into something dark and animalistic. Sleep became almost impossible. The cabins were too hot to stay in, so passengers dragged mattresses onto the open decks, creating makeshift camps under the stars. But even outside, the heat and smell followed them, mixing with the stench of decay and hopelessness. Many said they had nightmares about never escaping, about dying slowly in the middle of nowhere, while rescue ships passed them by without stopping. The lower decks were the worst. The floors were soaked with filthy water that sloshed around as the ship moved. Families with children had to wade through waist-deep sewage just to reach higher ground. Some passengers became completely numb, staring blankly into space. Others broke down and screamed for help that never came. One woman, Ann Barlow, later said, "You felt like an animal. All rules disappeared. People were doing things they would never normally do, and you started wondering if you would too. The smell got into your hair, your skin. Even now, certain smells make me panic." Her words describe what everyone felt, a mix of horror, shame, and fear that they might not make it out. The ship's announcement system, running on backup power, became both a lifeline and a cruel reminder of their helplessness. Every message promised that rescue was coming soon, but as hours turned into days, those promises started to sound empty. Some passengers stopped believing entirely. Others made peace with the idea that they might die at sea. Many began showing signs of psychological distress, confusion, detachment, and emotional numbness. Doctors later said it was acute stress disorder, a reaction to intense trauma. By the third day, the situation was beyond anything imaginable. People were using plastic bags as toilets and throwing them overboard. The few working faucets produced brown water that smelled and tasted like rust. Children cried endlessly, some from hunger, some from exhaustion. The ship's tiny medical room was overcrowded, with patients fainting from dehydration and heat. Supplies ran out quickly, leaving the sick to suffer without help. What made it worse wasn't just the filth or hunger, it was the feeling of being completely powerless. All around them, the vast ocean stretched endlessly. Planes flew overhead but couldn't help. Radios picked up reports about the ship, but no one could do anything for them. It felt like being forgotten by the world. The ship had become a prison, and the only way out was rescue or death. When tugboats finally reached them after 5 endless days, people cried and screamed with relief. But even then, the nightmare wasn't over. The tow back to shore took 8 more hours, during which the ship rocked violently, spreading the sewage even more. Passengers clung to the railings, praying for land. Many had gone days without food, surviving on raw onions and dry bread. When the ship finally reached Mobile, Alabama on February 14th, Valentine's Day, chaos erupted. People kissed the ground as soon as they stepped off, some collapsing from exhaustion. Many were too weak to walk and had to be carried. Others ran as fast as they could, desperate to escape the nightmare floating behind them. The emotional scars were just as deep as the physical ones. In the days that followed, passengers filed hundreds of lawsuits. They spoke of lasting trauma, panic attacks from certain smells, nightmares about being trapped, fear of enclosed spaces, or even fear of open areas. Some couldn't ride elevators anymore. Others couldn't step onto boats again. The media mocked the tragedy, calling it the poop cruise. But for those who lived it, there was nothing funny about what happened. It wasn't just a bad vacation. It was a total collapse of order, a glimpse into how quickly civilization can crumble when people are pushed to their limits. For 5 long days, 3,000 human beings faced a real-life horror story that tested their sanity, dignity, and survival instincts. The Carnival Triumph was later repaired, renamed, and put back into service. But for the people who lived through that floating hell in February 2013, it will always be remembered as the moment when paradise turned into madness, and when they learned just how thin the line truly is between civilization and chaos. When you're trapped in the middle of an endless, indifferent ocean, paradise can vanish in an instant, leaving only fear, darkness, and the echo of your own hope fading into the sea. Story 2. The Royal Caribbean's grandeur of the seas was gliding smoothly through the Atlantic under clear skies when something began happening on Deck 6. Something so strange it terrified the crew. It was March 2018, and what started as one odd disappearance would soon grow into a haunting pattern that no one could explain. It began with Margaret Chen, a 67-year-old grandmother from Seattle, who vanished from her cabin on the third night of the cruise. Her husband, Robert, woke at around 3 a.m. to find her gone. Her side of the bed was cold. The bathroom door stood open, lights off. Her glasses were neatly folded on the nightstand, shoes still by the door, purse untouched. It was as though she had simply dissolved into thin air. The crew began a full-scale search across the massive ship, checking every bar, lounge, deck, and storage room. Security reviewed hours of footage from the surveillance system, but there was no trace of Margaret after she entered her cabin at 10:30 p.m. that night. She had disappeared from a locked interior room, one with no balcony, 7 decks above the ocean waves. The search went on all the next day. Passengers were questioned, crew members interviewed, but no one had seen or heard a thing. The official theory said Margaret must have left her cabin and fallen overboard, but how she got past the locked door and the monitoring systems was never answered. Her family was heartbroken, and still the cruise continued. 3 nights later, it happened again. David Kowalski, a 45-year-old engineer from Detroit, vanished from his cabin, also on Deck 6. His roommate woke to find his bed untouched, his belongings neatly in place. David's wallet, with hundreds in cash, was still there. His watch sat on the dresser, his passport locked safely away. Security footage showed him entering his cabin at 11:47 p.m., but never coming out. Panic began to ripple through the ship. Both disappearances had happened on Deck 6, both in the early morning hours, and both victims were last seen in locked rooms. Passengers started sleeping in public lounges, too afraid to return to their cabins. Some begged to move to other decks, but the ship was full. The crew tried to keep things calm, but whispers spread fast. People began calling it the ghost deck, claiming something was prowling the corridors at night. Theories flew around: sleepwalking, murder, suicide, but none explained how people could simply vanish without a trace. On the seventh night, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez, a 34-year-old teacher from Phoenix, was lying awake in her cabin on Deck 6. She regretted booking the cheaper room there now. Around 2:30 a.m., she heard footsteps in the hallway, but not normal ones. These steps were wet, heavy, and slow, followed by a faint dripping sound. Lisa froze, listening. The steps moved closer, stopping at each door, one by one. Then they stopped outside hers. The handle turned slowly, testing the lock. For minutes that felt like hours, something stood there, silent. When morning finally came, Lisa ran to security, terrified. They found water in the hallway, not clean water, but salty ocean water with bits of seaweed floating in it. The crew mopped it up quickly and blamed a leak, but everyone who saw it knew it couldn't be condensation. You don't get seawater on an interior deck. 2 nights later, another passenger vanished. James Morrison, a retired police officer from Baltimore, had volunteered to keep watch in the Deck 6 hallway, determined to catch whoever or whatever was behind the disappearances. He positioned himself in a corner near the elevators with a clear view down the hall. At 3:17 a.m., according to a text he sent his wife, he saw something coming toward him. That was the last anyone heard from him. His phone was later found cracked on the floor where he had been sitting. The camera feed showed him standing there until 3:15 a.m., and then nothing. The hallway remained empty for the rest of the night, except for a faint trail of seawater leading to a maintenance door that opened onto an exterior deck. A door that required a special key card James didn't have. By then, Deck 6 was practically abandoned. Passengers and even some crew refused to go near it. Strange things kept happening anyway. Elevator doors would open on Deck 6, revealing flooded corridors that were dry minutes later. People heard splashing coming from empty rooms. The air carried a faint, rotten seaweed smell that came and went. One night, a maintenance worker investigating water damage opened the door to cabin 6247, the same one Margaret Chen had disappeared from, and found it completely flooded, waist-deep in freezing seawater full of seaweed and tiny sea creatures. He ran for help, but when he returned with a supervisor 20 minutes later, the room was perfectly dry. There was no sign it had ever been filled with water. Passengers began spreading stories the crew tried to suppress. People said they saw pale, drenched figures wandering the halls at night, shapes that moved awkwardly, their limbs jerking like something not meant for land. They wore cruise ship uniforms, but their clothes hung heavy and dripping, as if they had just crawled out of the ocean. One night, Maria Santos, a nurse from Miami, saw one of them herself. She had taken the elevator for a late walk, and when the doors opened on Deck 6, a soaked woman stood there staring at her. The woman's eyes were blank white, her skin gray-blue and bloated. Seawater streamed from her mouth and nose. Maria recognized her face. It was Margaret Chen. Maria screamed and tried to close the elevator doors, but they wouldn't budge. Margaret stepped closer, her footsteps wet and slow, until finally the doors shut. When Maria reported it, security said the elevator logs showed she never stopped on Deck 6 at all, but Maria knew what she had seen. On the final night of the cruise, a passenger named Tom Bradley, a former Navy SEAL, decided to catch the haunting on film. Armed with night vision equipment, he hid on Deck 6. His footage, later leaked online despite the cruise line's efforts to erase it, showed something truly impossible. Around 3:33 a.m., seawater began to rise through the floor, not leaking from walls or pipes, but appearing from the carpet itself, spreading fast. Then figures began stepping out of cabin doors. Margaret, David, James, and others who had vanished. They moved slowly, as if underwater, their skin pale and swollen. Their faces looked frozen in death. But the most disturbing thing was their precision. They weren't wandering aimlessly. They gathered together, facing Tom's hiding spot. Then in eerie unison, they turned toward the camera and began walking straight at him. The footage cut off abruptly. Tom was found the next morning in his cabin on deck 8, barely alive. He was suffering from hypothermia and saltwater poisoning, even though he'd never been near the ocean that night. He never recovered, mentally or physically, and was later institutionalized. His camera was discovered in cabin 6247, sitting in a puddle of seawater that maintenance workers swore was impossible. When the grandeur of the seas finally docked in Fort Lauderdale, Deck 6 was sealed off, officially due to water damage. Passengers were offered hush money to sign non-disclosure agreements. Many refused, but few ever spoke about what they'd seen. The cruise line rebuilt Deck 6 entirely, but the haunting didn't end. Later voyages reported the same strange things, always between 3 and 4 a.m., always on Deck 6. People vanished. Others swore they saw the same drowned figures wandering the halls. Eventually, the cruise line stopped using Deck 6 for passengers at all, calling it a storage area. No one could explain what had happened that March of 2018. Official reports blame malfunctions and accidents, but those who were there knew better. Something from the deep Atlantic had found its way aboard that ship. Something ancient and hungry that dragged people into its cold, endless world. Even 7 decks above the sea, it could still reach up and pull you under. Story 3. The Deep Sleep. The Celebrity Solstice was halfway through its 10-day Mediterranean cruise when passengers began having what the ship's doctors first called unusually vivid dreams. But as the ship drifted calmly between Sicily and Malta, it soon became clear these weren't just dreams. They were something far darker, something clawing its way into reality from beneath the waves. It began with Emma Rodriguez, a travel writer from Chicago who had booked a luxury suite on Deck 10 to review the ship. On the 4th night, she had what she later called the most horrifying dream of her life. She was walking through the Solstice's hallways, but everything was wrong. The soft carpet had vanished, replaced by corroded metal floors that rang beneath her feet. The walls sweated with a thick, decaying moisture, and the lights flickered dim yellow, throwing twitching shadows across the corridor. Other passengers drifted past her, but they weren't right either. Their faces blurred when she tried to look directly at them, and when they spoke, their words echoed from far away, warped and hollow. They seemed to be whispering secrets she couldn't understand, or maybe wasn't supposed to. Emma woke shaking, drenched in cold sweat, but her fear turned to terror when she noticed the smell, that same rotten, metallic scent from her dream, still lingering in the air. Worse, her feet were filthy, not with dust or sand, but smeared with reddish grime, as though she'd walked barefoot across rusted steel. She checked her suite in panic. Everything was spotless, the carpet soft and clean, the air conditioning humming normally. Nothing explained the smell or the dirt. At breakfast, she nervously shared her nightmare with other guests, expecting laughter. Instead, the table went silent. Marcus Thompson, a retired engineer from Boston, admitted he'd seen the same rusted corridors. Sarah Kim, a nurse from Seattle, whispered that she'd met the same distorted passengers speaking that half-familiar, wrong-sounding language. Even more disturbing, they too had woken up with dirty feet and that same smell clinging to their clothes. Dr. James Hoffman, the ship's medical officer, dismissed it as coincidence at first. Passengers sometimes influenced each other's dreams in close quarters, he said. But by the 6th day, nearly 200 people had experienced the same thing, the same nightmare ship, and they all woke up with the same physical signs: grime on their feet, the stench of rot, and strange scratches along their arms and legs. The dreams were evolving. Each night the nightmare ship grew more detailed, more alive. There were new areas that didn't exist on the real solstice. Flooded decks where something vast moved beneath black water. Engine rooms made of throbbing flesh instead of metal. Dining halls where the meals writhed and breathed. The passengers they met inside were growing stronger too. No longer ghosts, they began touching the dreamers, leaving behind cold, wet imprints that stayed after waking. They spoke in their garbled language, always gesturing for the dreamers to follow, deeper and deeper into the ship's belly. Rebecca Walsh, a psychology professor from Yale, began documenting it all. Her research uncovered a strange connection. Every affected passenger stayed on the port side and had received a deep tissue massage at the spa using a new aromatherapy oil. Staff said it came from rare Mediterranean herbs, but their explanations were inconsistent. When Rebecca demanded to see the shipment records, the staff became nervous. On the seventh night, the dreams turned violent. The dream passengers weren't just whispering anymore. They were pulling the dreamers into new, pulsating corridors that seemed to breathe. Thomas Anderson, a software developer from Austin, described being led to the engine room. But what he saw wasn't machinery. It was a giant living chamber filled with cocoons hanging from the ceiling. Inside each one floated a curled-up human figure. One of the nightmare passengers pointed toward an empty cocoon and spoke a single word in that strange tongue. A word Thomas somehow understood. They wanted him inside. He tried to resist, but the others surrounded him, their skin slick and pale like drowned corpses. Their hands were freezing and heavy as they shoved him toward the cocoon. When Thomas finally jolted awake, he was standing fully clothed in his cabin shower, water spraying ice cold, his clothes soaked through. The smell of seawater filled the air, and there were red finger-shaped bruises on his arms, exactly where they had grabbed him in the dream. Dr. Hoffman ordered a full investigation. What they found in the spa made his blood run cold. The so-called Mediterranean herb oil wasn't plant-based at all. Under a microscope, it looked biological, an organic secretion from an unknown marine organism, mixed with compounds that could affect the brain. Worse, the supplier didn't exist. The company name, the paperwork, even the shipping records were all fake. And the people who delivered it, they didn't appear in any of the ship's security footage. That discovery came too late. On the eighth night, the dreamers didn't just dream, they moved. Security cameras showed dozens of passengers leaving their cabins at exactly 3 a.m., walking in perfect sync toward the lower decks. Their eyes were closed, yet they navigated turns and stairs flawlessly, as if guided by something unseen. They gathered in the laundry room deep below the passenger decks, standing motionless in a ring around the washing machines. When security arrived, the machines were running, full of seawater that had somehow entered the freshwater system. Floating in the water were translucent masses that glowed faintly from within. When guards tried to wake the sleepwalkers, they found their eyes rolled completely white, mouths open as they exhaled mist that smelled of the ocean floor. They were humming, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the ship's hull like a heartbeat. Dr. Hoffman managed to rouse a few of them with ammonia salts. Their stories were worse than the dreams. They said they'd been pulled down through the ship, surrounded by pressure and darkness, hearing voices whisper that the solstice wasn't a ship at all. It was alive, a creature, something ancient that had disguised itself as a vessel, luring humans aboard to feed on their minds and bodies while they slept. When Emma Rodriguez finally woke, she grabbed Dr. Hoffman's arm and rasped, her voice gurgling with seawater. "It's not a ship. We're inside it." The remaining nights were chaos. People refused to sleep, huddling together in groups, terrified that closing their eyes meant being dragged back inside that living nightmare. But exhaustion always won. Those who drifted off were seen whispering in strange tongues, their bodies twitching as if underwater. By the last night, security found more than 50 passengers standing on the outer decks, eyes open, gazing silently into the dark Mediterranean. Beneath the moonlight, something massive moved below the surface. The exact shape of the celebrity solstice, but alive, covered in glowing growths that pulsed like veins. It mirrored the ship's every move, as if the two were connected, or one and the same. When the solstice finally reached Barcelona, the sick passengers were quietly taken to a private medical facility. The official explanation was food poisoning, but the crew knew the truth. Workers sealed off the spa and lower decks, replacing all the pipes and systems. Still, future voyages reported the same strange things. Passengers sharing identical nightmares, finding oceanic residue in their sinks, and hearing a deep humming echo through the hull between 3 and 4 a.m. Experts noticed the solstice's route always crossed some of the deepest trenches in the Mediterranean, regions no sonar had ever mapped completely. Sometimes sonar pings returned shapes that moved, massive and slow, just beneath the ship. Emma never slept soundly again. Every night she lay awake, afraid to dream, afraid to hear that humming rise from the walls. Sometimes just before dawn, she swore she could smell seawater again. And faintly from somewhere deep below her apartment floor, she could hear it. The slow rhythmic beating of something vast and alive, waiting for her to close her eyes once more. Story 5. The Royal Princess was famous for its stunning Deck 15 observation lounge, a glass-walled space filled with polished mirrors and giant windows, showing endless views of the ocean. Every evening, passengers gathered there to watch the sun melt into the horizon, turning the sea gold. But during its October 2019 transatlantic trip, something strange began happening in those mirrors, something that should never exist. The reflections started acting on their own, and the passengers who stared too long began to disappear, vanishing into their own reflections. It all started with Catherine Mills, a photographer from Denver who was covering the cruise for a travel magazine. One evening, she set up her camera in the lounge to catch the sunset through the wide glass windows. As she adjusted her lens, she noticed something off in one of the large decorative mirrors on the wall. Her reflection was there, but it was moving differently. The mirrored Catherine lifted her camera to her eye, even though the real Catherine's hands were still busy adjusting the settings. She leaned in, thinking it was a trick of the light. But then her reflection smiled while her real face stayed still. The reflected version waved at her and then pointed behind her, warning her of something unseen. Catherine turned sharply, but the room was empty. When she faced the mirror again, everything was normal. Her reflection moved as it should, copying her exactly. Shaken, she mentioned it later that night at dinner, only to find she wasn't alone. David Chen, a businessman from San Francisco, said he saw his reflection in the restroom mirror, speaking to him silently, lips moving fast as if begging him to listen. Maria Santos, a retired teacher, said she saw her reflection in the elevator mirror, gesturing wildly, pointing at something outside the elevator, something only the reflection could see. Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychiatrist traveling with her husband, tried to calm everyone down. She explained that being surrounded by endless water could play tricks on the mind, but her confidence vanished after her own experience. One sleepless night, she went to the lounge to read. The room was dim, lit only by weak emergency lights. The mirrors stretched endlessly, reflecting her image into dark infinity. As she read, movement caught her eye. Her reflection was also reading, but the book in its hands was not the same. It looked old, bound in what seemed like human skin, and it glowed faintly. The reflected Dr. Foster looked up with black, hollow eyes and a sharp, unnatural smile. Its teeth were pointed like knives. Then, without sound, its mouth formed clear words she could somehow understand. "Come closer. See what you really are, terrified." She fled the room. Unable to rest, Dr. Foster began digging into the ship's history and made a chilling discovery. The Royal Princess had been built using parts salvaged from older ships, including mirrors from the SS Morro Castle, a cruise liner that burned at sea in 1934, killing many on board. Those mirrors, it seemed, had already seen death and maybe carried something from it. After that, things grew worse. Passengers started claiming their reflections were acting strangely, writing words on fogged mirrors, waving desperately, or staring back in pure terror. Some mirrors showed passengers in clothes from the 1930s, like echoes from another time. Susan Walsh, a librarian from Portland, had one of the most terrifying encounters. While dressing for dinner, she noticed that her reflection was getting ready for bed instead, wearing a white, old-fashioned nightgown she didn't own. Then the reflected Susan looked terrified. She began clawing at the gown as if it were burning, screaming silently. Susan reached toward the mirror, and what happened next froze her in place. Her reflection pressed its hand against the other side of the glass. Susan felt heat radiating from it, and she swore she could smell smoke. When she pulled away, there was a handprint burned inside the glass, on the wrong side of the mirror. The first disappearance happened a week into the journey. Robert Martinez, a chef from Los Angeles, was last seen in the observation lounge around midnight, staring deeply into one of the large mirrors.
My rational mind fought to explain it. Tricks of light, reflection, fatigue, but deep down, I knew the truth. Something aboard the Sea Monarch was watching, something that wasn't human. Desperate for answers, I grabbed the radio near the corridor and tried calling for help. Static filled the radio, followed by faint voices whispering my name. "Ethan, stay, don't leave." My blood ran cold. I slammed the radio down. It wasn't the captain or the crew. The ship was speaking to me. Later that night, I found a lifeboat. For a moment, hope flared inside me. I climbed in, gripping the ropes, ready to lower myself into the dark sea. But the moment the boat touched the water, it sank without a sound, leaving behind only ripples that quickly disappeared. The fog thickened, curling around me like it was pleased. I don't know how long I wandered after that. Every deck looked longer, more twisted than before. Normal places, the dining hall, the pool, the lounge, had warped versions of themselves, mirrors of something mocking reality. Somewhere in the shadows, I kept hearing laughter, soft and human, whispering my name again and again. The next morning, the ship felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just aware. I'm Ethan Cole, still wandering the Sea Monarch, trying to believe I haven't gone completely insane. Breakfast seemed normal, coffee, eggs, passengers chatting, but beneath it all was a strange tension, like everyone was pretending. People moved stiffly, like mannequins. Their eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. No smiles. I decided to follow one of them, a young man in a baseball cap, down a narrow corridor I didn't recognize. It stretched longer than it should have, lights flickering faintly. At the end, a door stood open. Inside was nothing but darkness and the smell of salt water. As I stepped closer, I heard a voice, my own voice, whisper, "Ethan, come in." I froze. The man was gone. In his place stood an older passenger I'd met at dinner, smiling politely. "Lost something?" he asked, voice warm. Then his face twisted horribly, his jaw stretching, teeth scraping, and his body dissolved into fog that crawled along the floor like living smoke. Panic surged through me. I ran. The PA system crackled above, repeating my own thoughts back to me, slower, distorted. Curiosity never ends. I needed to escape. I remembered the lifeboat and ran toward the upper deck. The fog was heavier now, almost solid, brushing against my legs and slowing me down. I stumbled up the stairwell, but when I reached the top, it wasn't the upper deck. It was another hallway I had never seen before, lined with doors that weren't on any ship map. A woman appeared suddenly, clutching a small bag. She looked exactly like my coworker from Chicago, the one who'd been missing for a year. "Ethan," she whispered, voice trembling, "you shouldn't be here." I asked what she meant. She leaned closer and said, "The ship isn't real." Then she vanished. I ran again, bursting out onto the top deck, and there it was. The lifeboat. I felt a surge of hope so strong it almost hurt. I ran, loosened the ropes, climbed in, and began to lower myself. For a moment I thought I was free, but as soon as the boat touched the surface, it didn't float. It sank straight down, the black water swallowing it whole. I realized then there were no stars, no waves, no ocean at all, just the ship and the fog, stretching forever. Desperate, I grabbed another radio from the crew corridor. Static again, then a faint voice whispered, "Ethan, the ship watches. The ship knows." I threw the radio, fear burning through me. The ship was alive. It wasn't just haunting me. It was toying with me. By nightfall, the corridors had changed again. The halls I'd walked that morning were gone. Stairs twisted and impossible. Ways. Doors appeared and vanished. Familiar rooms like the dining hall or pool now looked wrong, distorted copies of themselves. I saw others too, passengers I'd met before, frozen mid-step, staring blankly into nothing. Others weren't real at all. Transparent shapes, faint silhouettes of what the ship had already devoured. One reached for me, but when I blinked, it vanished. The ship fed on being watched, and I was its newest meal. Then I saw it, a door slightly open, glowing faintly with golden light. It wasn't on any map. My heart raced. Maybe it was a way out. I stepped closer, trembling as whispers rose around me, layered, echoing my name. I reached for the handle, but before I could touch it, the door slammed shut. The echo still rings in my ears. I can still feel the pull of that hallway, the one that shouldn't exist. I'm Ethan Cole, 35, still trapped on the Sea Monarch, and I've realized nothing here obeys the rules of the real world. Every step I take, the deck shifts. Every corner I turn, the hallways stretch and twist. By the third day, the changes weren't subtle anymore. They were impossible. I passed the dining hall again. The tables were set, food untouched, coffee gone cold. A family sat there mid-laughter, but they were frozen like statues, their eyes black and hollow. I blinked, and they vanished. Only the scent of burnt sugar lingered. I tried using the stairs again, thinking maybe I could climb high enough to escape, but every flight seemed longer, stretching endlessly. When I reached the top, the fog was thicker than ever. That's when I saw him, the captain, or something wearing his face. His uniform was torn, soaked, his eyes two black pits. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, voice echoing like 1,000 whispers in a tunnel. I tried to answer, but my voice came out wrong, slow, distorted. "Ethan, you're lost," he said again, stepping closer. A wall appeared behind me where the railing should have been. I turned and ran. My heartbeat roared in my ears. The photo G followed like a living thing, curling around my legs. I found another lifeboat, my last chance. I loosened it, climbed in, and lowered it slowly, praying for calm water. But the water wasn't water. It was a black emptiness. The boat sank the moment it touched. I gasped, backing away, and heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, not mine. I turned. A figure was running toward me, fast, too fast, its face changing with every step, shifting between every person I'd seen on the ship. I bolted into the nearest corridor, the ship bending around me, walls stretched, doors vanished. I stumbled into a room, a crew lounge, or what looked like one. It was empty except for a chair and a notebook. The pages flipped on their own, though no air moved. My handwriting covered every page, describing things that hadn't happened yet. Fog thickening, voices calling, boats sinking, my future written down. I thought of my phone. Maybe I could call for help. I sprinted back to my cabin, dodging the shadows that slid along the walls. But my phone was gone, like it had been erased from existence. Then came the voices again, all around me, whispering in unison. "Ethan, choose, stay, leave, curiosity." My head throbbed. I covered my ears, but the sound came from inside my skull. The ship wasn't around me anymore. It was inside me. I ran, desperate, until I found a corridor that looked normal. Bright lights, carpeted floors, familiar paintings. For a moment, I believed I'd escaped. I heard laughter, real human laughter. I followed it. The corridor looped. I stopped, breath caught. I was standing in front of the same lifeboat again. Only now, someone was waiting beside it. A tall figure, half hidden by fog, smiling faintly. "You can leave," it said softly, "if you're brave enough to step into the water." My heart pounded. One step could save me, or end me. The fog curled tighter. I took a deep beachhead, wreath, and stepped forward. When I hit the water, I felt nothing. No cold, no wetness, just weightlessness, like floating in heavy air. I'm Ethan Cole, 35, history teacher, and I know now that the Sea Monarch isn't a ship at all. Above me, the fog twisted like a living thing. The ropes dangled into nothing. I tried to swim, but the water didn't move. My arms felt delayed, like time was bending. Maybe I was sinking, or maybe the ship was rising, swallowing the world around me. A voice came from the mist, soft, distorted. "Ethan, you can't leave, but you can see." I tried to speak, but my words were stolen before they formed. Shapes moved in the fog, Passengers, crew, faces I knew and faces I didn't. They circled me slowly, watching. Some smiled, others whispered. I saw the captain again, standing impossibly tall, eyes hollow. "Choice," he said. "Leave and vanish. Stay and see." I reached for the lifeboat again, desperate. The rope stretched, pulled toward the fog, and then something, my own hand, appeared from the mist, grabbing my shoulder. My reflection whispered, "Why fight it?" When I hit the water, I felt nothing. No cold, no wetness, just weightlessness like floating in heavy air. I'm Ethan Cole, 35, history teacher, and I know now that the Sea Monarch isn't a ship at all. Above me, the fog twisted like a living thing. The ropes dangled into nothing. I tried to swim, but the water didn't move. My arms felt delayed, like time was bending. Maybe I was sinking, or maybe the ship was rising, swallowing the world around me. A voice came from the mist, soft, distorted. "Ethan, you can't leave, but you can see." I tried to speak, but my words were stolen before they formed. Shapes moved in the fog, passengers, crew, faces I knew and faces I didn't. They circled me slowly, watching. Some smiled, others whispered. I saw the captain again, standing impossibly tall, eyes hollow. "Choice," he said. "Leave and vanish. Stay and see." I reached for the lifeboat again, desperate. The rope stretched, pulled toward the fog, and then something, my own hand, appeared from the mist, grabbing my shoulder. My reflection whispered, "Why fight it?" The fog closed in. The ship, the sea, the sky, all gone. My limbs moved through air thick as water. The figures around me watched in silence. Then, through the haze, I saw it again. A door, slightly open, light spilling out. Familiar, impossible. I ran, stumbling, the whispers chasing me. Curiosity brought you. Curiosity binds you. I reached the door. Every part of me screamed to stop, but curiosity won. I pushed it open. Inside was light, still, quiet, warm. I stepped through. The fog didn't follow. The whispers stopped. I floated, weightless but aware, seeing everything. Outside, the ship twisted endlessly, passengers looping through time. I understood. I hadn't escaped. I'd only changed. I could see now, the lifeboat sinking, the corridors bending, the passengers repeating their stories forever. I was part of the observation, tethered but alive. Watching. Waiting. If you're hearing this, take a second to subscribe to Eerie Hour. It keeps stories like this alive. I understand now, the ship doesn't destroy. It transforms. Those who disappear become its memories, its patterns. I'm still here, still Ethan, but different. The fog whispers, the corridors shift, and every new passenger is another story waiting to be written. I see them sometimes, laughing, unaware of what's coming. The fog curls around their ankles, the lights flicker, a door opens, and I wonder, will they see me? Will they notice what hides just beyond the normal? Because the ship never forgets, and I am part of it now. Story 4. I still remember the cold feeling that crept over me the moment I stepped onto the Ocean Whisperer. The air smelled of salt and polished wood, but instead of comfort, it brought unease, like the ocean was warning me to turn back. That's when I saw it. The first odd thing. Cabin 214's door was slightly open, though the crew had said it was empty. No one else on the deck seemed to notice. My name is Morgan Hayes, 32, a freelance photographer from Portland, Oregon. I don't usually travel alone, but after the divorce, I needed quiet. No clients, no noise, just distance from everything that reminded me of what fell apart. I thought a week at sea would help. I was wrong. The promenade deck felt peaceful at first, families laughing, couples walking hand in hand, the usual calm hum of vacation. But that door, cabin 214, wouldn't leave my mind. It was open just enough to catch the light. When I looked closer, I saw the faint flicker of the room's lamp. The room was supposed to be empty. Curiosity pushed me forward. I touched the door, and it creaked softly as I stepped in. Inside, it looked normal. Bed made, blankets folded, plain artwork on the walls, the kind that made you forget where you were. But the air was colder inside, and I heard something, a faint whisper, softer than breath. "Leave or stay." I froze. The room was empty. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was the air vent. I took a quick photo instinctively, just to prove to myself it was real. But on the camera screen, the room looked darker, and shadows curled along the edges, like something hiding just beyond sight. Dinner that night felt almost normal. I sat with a couple I'd met earlier, chatting about ports and sightseeing. It was a relief to hear laughter again, to feel normal for even a moment. But just as I raised my glass, the waiter leaned close and whispered quietly, "Cabin 214, don't go back." I froze. I tried to laugh it off, but my pulse didn't slow. Later, I walked the upper deck. Fog drifted in, thin at first, harmless. Passengers moved past me, calm, unaware. But I noticed a man in a dark coat standing at the railing, hat pulled low. Every time I blinked, he as gone. By the time I reached my cabin, number 302, the door was slightly open, like 214 had followed me. Inside was empty, except for a note on the desk. Some doors are meant to be left closed. I didn't touch it. I left, my heart racing. The hallways had changed. Cabin numbers were wrong. 215 came before 213. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the walls were breathing. I stopped to listen. There was laughter somewhere, soft, distant, but wrong. Not people laughing, layers of sound blending, overlapping. Then, a whisper. "Morgan." I spun around. Empty. My flashlight flickered, and the air thickened. The ship had changed. It moved differently, almost aware of me. I wanted to believe I was tired, imagining things, but deep down I knew I had already crossed into something I couldn't leave. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the metal hull sounded alive, every hum deliberate. Somewhere far down the hall a door slammed, cabin 214. Or was it mine? The fog pressed against the window, swirling into faces I half recognized. That's when I realized the Ocean Whisperer wasn't a cruise. It was a trap, dressed in luxury. The second day started bright and ordinary. The dining hall buzzed with noise, the smell of pastries and coffee filling the air. For a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a dream, but the note on my desk stayed burned in my mind. I sipped my coffee, pretending I didn't feel watched. Then I saw him again, the man in the dark coat, standing at the far end of the room. I blinked. He vanished. I decided to explore the ship in daylight, hoping reason would return. The decks looked normal, but corridors twisted wrong, stairwells looped back on themselves, and cabin numbers repeated. Each change sent a chill through me. By mid-morning, I found myself near 214 again. The door was shut this time, but a faint draft seeped from it, carrying a smell of salt, and decay. When I touched the knob, it pulsed faintly, warm, alive. I pulled my hand away. The ship wasn't metal anymore. It was something living, breathing, feeding on curiosity. I tried to shake it off and wandered into a mid-deck lounge, where I met Thomas, a retired engineer. He joked about how confusing the ship's layout was. For a moment, I laughed. It felt normal again. Then the doors of the lounge slid open, and someone stepped through. Pale skin, too tall, too quiet. I blinked, and they were gone. Thomas brushed it off, but I saw the fear in his eyes. By afternoon, things got worse. Shadows moved against the light. Passengers stared at nothing, whispering words I couldn't hear. I tried to go back to my cabin, but the hallway had changed. My door led somewhere else, a corridor lined with repeating doors, all marked 2 and 14. Every room looked the same, yet wrong. A tilted picture frame, footprints that led nowhere, whispers that echoed when no one spoke. I photographed everything, desperate to prove it was real. Every photo looked darker than the last. By evening, the whispers grew louder. They came from everywhere. Decks, walls, vents, voices calling names, blending, looping. I ran to the upper deck, searching for air. The fog rolled in faster this time, curling along the railings. Shapes formed within it, passengers I had seen earlier, now frozen, pale, hollow-eyed. They didn't move, but their presence pressed against me, heavy, suffocating. That night, I made a decision. I had to face cabin 214. I returned to the corridor, flashlight trembling in my hand. The numbering was wrong again. 3 doors marked 214 stood side by side. I stopped at the first, my pulse hammering. A soft voice called, "Morgan." I pushed the door open. Inside, the bed was made, neat, harmless. But then the room shifted. The air bent. The walls moved closer. A whisper grazed my ear. "Come closer." I stumbled back and opened the second 214. The bed was unmade. A figure sat on the edge, face hidden. "You shouldn't have come back," it said. The voice was too calm, too human. And I ran to the third door, yanked it open, empty, until the door slammed shut behind me. The lights flickered. The walls began to scratch, circling me. I banged on the door, screaming, but the handle wouldn't move. The scratching turned into whispers. "Curiosity brought you." Curiosity keeps you. The words wrapped around me, closing in. I realized then the ship wasn't just cursed, it was hungry. Cabin 214 wasn't a room. It was a trap, a mouth waiting for someone like me. The deck rumbled beneath my feet. The ship shifted, alive and aware. My heartbeat matched the hum of the metal. Then a sudden metallic clang broke through the noise, and the door swung open. I stumbled out, gasping. The hallway was empty again. Mist drifted through the corridor. Doors lined the wall, all marked 214, all slightly open. One whispered my name again, Morgan. I realized with dread that this night would never end. Cabin 214 was everywhere and nowhere, moving and shifting, waiting for me. The ship itself felt alive, patient, hungry, feeding on curiosity. It knew that every step I took only pulled me deeper into its maze. I gripped my flashlight tightly and took a shaky breath. Somewhere ahead, a door was waiting. I didn't know if it would lead me to freedom or something much worse, but I couldn't stop now. Sleep had left me. The hum of the ship vibrated beneath my feet, steady and rhythmic, syncing with my heartbeat. Even when morning came, the hallways bent in strange ways that didn't make sense. Maps were useless, signs lied, stairwells looped endlessly, leading to decks that shouldn't exist. I am Morgan Hayes, 32, a freelance photographer who thought she could escape her life for a week. But the Ocean Whisperer had other plans. Cabin 214 had become a haunting presence, following me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Even when I avoided that section of the ship, I felt it close behind me, waiting. By the third night, the whispers were everywhere. They came from the walls, from inside the vents, even through the ship's speakers. Sometimes they were voices I recognized, people I had met at dinner, laughing, calling out names. Other times, they were strangers, whispering things I couldn't fully understand, begging me to stop, to look closer, to leave. I tried to stay distracted. One morning I went for coffee. The dining hall was nearly empty, sunlight spilling across the tables. Everything looked normal for a second, silverware neatly placed, cups aligned. But then I noticed 3 chairs in a small circle, gently rocking, as if someone had just stood up. No one was there. The engine's hum changed pitch. It didn't sound like machinery anymore. It sounded alive, intentional. I hurried back to my cabin, hoping to ground myself, but the hallway stretched and bent as I walked. Door numbers flickered, repeating and skipping until once again 214 appeared, closer than it should have been. I stood there, knowing I shouldn't go in, but unable to resist. Inside, the room was different this time. The bed was pushed against the wall, a chair upside down on the floor, and shadows moved in corners that didn't exist before. Then I saw it, a notebook on the desk, open. The pages were filled with my own handwriting, describing things I hadn't done yet, moments that hadn't happened. Each line was more detailed than I could remember writing. One phrase stood out in bold. "Do not leave. The ship knows you." My hands trembled. I dropped the notebook, my heart pounding as the air thickened. The walls seemed to breathe, the floor creaking in rhythm with the whispers. A shape stood near the window, the same pale, tall man from before, his face hidden by a hat. He raised a long, thin finger toward the door and whispered, "Curiosity is not harmless." My pulse spiked. I bolted from the room, ashlight shaking in my grip. The corridor twisted endlessly, lined with more doors marked 214. Each one whispered my name as I ran. A door slammed behind me, echoing like thunder. When I turned, the hallway had shifted again. The door I'd exited was gone, replaced by another identical 214, perfectly still, perfectly silent. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, stress, but that illusion shattered when I reached the mid-deck. A young woman stood by the railing, one I'd seen at breakfast earlier. Her skin was pale, her body unnaturally still, her gaze lost in the fog. I approached carefully. Her lips moved, but I couldn't hear her words. Then she turned, and I realized she was calling my name in my voice. Terror gripped me. I ran, cutting through endless corridors and down stairwells that spiraled downward far too long to be real. The PA system hissed, and the captain's voice echoed through the speakers. "Welcome aboard the Ocean Whisperer. Enjoy your stay." But the tone was wrong, slow, distorted, mocking. It wasn't a man's voice anymore. It was the ship itself. Time lost meaning. I found myself on the top deck again, surrounded by fog so thick it pressed against my skin. Through it, I saw figures moving, Passengers and crew, frozen mid-step, their faces blank, their eyes glassy. Doors marked 214 floated along the railings now, suspended in the mist. I finally understood. The ship wasn't sailing through the sea, it was drifting through something else, something built from fear and memory. It didn't need an ocean. It sailed the minds of its passengers. I stumbled toward a lifeboat, desperate to escape. But when I looked out, the water below wasn't water at all. It was black, endless, swallowing light. The ropes swayed through there was no wind, no motion. The world outside didn't exist anymore. Leaning against the lifeboat wall, I heard a whisper behind me. One mo, re-choice. I turned and froze. 3 doors stood upright on the deck, far from the rails, glowing faintly in the fog. Each one marked 214. My chest tightened. One door could mean freedom. The others, something else entirely. My heartbeat matched the tapping that came from somewhere in the mist, steady, deliberate. Then one door creaked open on its own. A hand reached out, pale, shadowed, trembling. The fog pressed close around me, heavy and alive. My name echoed softly through the air. I am Morgan Hayes, 32, a photographer who thought she could run from her life for a week. But this ship, this ocean whisperer, had plans of its own. The hand hovered in the air, its outline stretching impossibly long. I felt it tugging at me, pulling at my curiosity, offering answers, maybe even freedom. I wanted to resist, but something inside me stepped closer. The deck shuddered violently beneath my feet. Metal groaned, and whispers filled the fog like 1,000 unseen voices. Faces appeared, passengers I'd seen before, families, couples, all transparent, all frozen mid-reach, their expressions locked between terror and hope. They were part of the ship now, waiting for me to join them. I ran. Doors and faces blurred around me. The PA system spoke again, repeating my thoughts in my own voice. Step forward. Step forward. Every corridor twisted back on itself. Every exit led to more doors marked 214, each whispering, promising something I couldn't name. The note's warning replayed in my mind. Some doors are meant to be left closed. I wanted to believe I could still escape, but the ship pulsed around me like a living thing, and the whispers knew my name. Then I saw one last door, different from the others. Its paint was cracked, the handle rusted. I didn't want to touch it, but something deeper than fear guided my hand. The moment I did, the fog exploded around me, swallowing everything. The whispers turned to screams, layered, endless, calling me home. A chorus of voices echoed through the walls, passengers lost to the ship's hunger. I pulled the door open, my hands shaking. Inside, there was nothing, or maybe something beyond my understanding. The room stretched endlessly, walls fading into blackness, ceiling gone. I saw my reflection in the polished floor, my own wide eyes staring back, trembling. But then the reflection moved on its own. It lifted a hand, warning me, then smiled. A voice whispered from everywhere at once, soft and calm. Curiosity brought you. Only curiosity can save you. My heart pounded. Panic clawed at me. I stumbled backward. Behind me, the hallway twisted, bending like something alive. Doors floated in midair, swinging open one by one. Inside each, I saw glimpses of passengers, some screaming, some silent, their eyes fixed on me. The ship was hungry for attention, feeding on every emotion, and now it had chosen me. I turned, desperate for escape. One of the doors, the one with the cracked frame, glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. I stepped through. The air grew cold, sharp as broken glass. For a moment, silence wrapped around me. Then came a knock from the far corner, another, closer. I froze. If you're listening, take a second to subscribe to Eerie Hour, I whispered to myself, half in fear, half to stay sane. Saying it out loud grounded me, like a thread holding me to reality. But the knocking grew louder, faster, impatient. The shadows on the walls began to stretch, forming shapes that weren't human. My reflection appeared again on the floor, mouth moving without sound, eyes hollow. Then a hand reached out, not from a wall or door, but from the air itself, passing through me like smoke. That's when I understood. The ship didn't want escape. It wanted choice. It wanted me to decide, to step forward and join its maze or step back and let my curiosity die. But there was no retreat. The floor beneath me shifted, breathing like a living thing. The fog, this. Weakened. A whisper followed, close enough to touch. Choose, Morgan. Choose. I opened my eyes. The doors were gone. Only the fog remained, swirling and alive, curling like smoke around me. In the distance, the faint hum of engines pulsed like a heartbeat, syncing with my own. That's when I realized the truth. The ship was alive, ancient, patient, and I was never really in control. From the first step I took aboard, it had already begun claiming me. I don't know how long I stood there. Time had lost meaning. All I knew was one wrong move could end me, or start something far worse. Through the haze, I saw it, a door glowing faintly in the mist. No number, no name, just there, waiting. My curiosity screamed to open it, but my fear screamed louder. I reached toward it, then froze. In the reflection on its surface, I didn't see my face or the corridor. I saw the entire ship. The Ocean Whisperer itself, endless, breathing, and staring back at me. I couldn't tell if it wanted me to enter or if I had always been part of it. The fog began to move differently, with purpose. It wasn't drifting anymore. It was watching. It learned how I moved, how I hesitated, as if testing me. I am Morgan Hayes, 32, freelance photographer from Portland. And I should have turned back. I should have run for anything solid. But my curiosity held me captive. The ship already owned pieces of me, my reflection, my fear, my choices. The glowing door pulsed again, slower now, like a steady heartbeat. In the fog, faint outlines appeared, passengers I'd seen before, pale, faceless, barely human. They drifted at the edge of sight, whispering in voices that overlapped. You will see. You will join forever. I stepped closer. My foot sank into the fog. It felt thick, almost solid, yet alive. The ship groaned beneath me, a deep rumble that crawled through my bones. Then the floor rippled, the hallways, the decks, the rooms. They weren't real. The ship was shaping itself around me, built from my fear and my curiosity. Every heartbeat dragged me deeper into its design. I tried to run, but the fog pressed against me, heavy as water. I fell against one of the reappeared 214 doors and slammed it shut. The air turned cold again, sharp with the smell of salt and metal, the same as the first night. I realized I was trapped between two nightmares, the glowing door ahead and the endless 214s behind. A voice came from the mist. Morgan! It was my own, distorted, like it echoed through every wall. The ship knows you. You will stay. I covered my ears, but the whispers pushed through, replaying my memories, each step, each thought, each glance toward cabin 214. The ship had been feeding on me since I boarded, feeding on what I wanted to understand. Now it wanted me to choose. I reached toward the glowing door, unable to stop. My reflection appeared again, clearer this time, smiling with a cruel understanding. Curiosity brought you, it said. Step forward, or remain forever lost. I didn't move. Couldn't. Then I felt it. A pull, soft at first, then stronger, like gravity dragging me in. The fog swirled faster, showing me faces, passengers frozen mid-scream, crew members half visible, figures with hollow eyes. They watched me, waiting. Cabin 214 floated in the middle of it all, larger than life, glowing like a heartbeat. It wasn't just a room. It was the ship's core, the trap that lured curiosity and turned it into fuel. I wanted to run, but the fog held me in place, thick and heavy. My breath came in short gasps. The ship whispered my name again and again. Then another hand reached from the glowing door. Not human, not yet. My curiosity overtook everything. I reached out and the fog swallowed me whole. The deck, the doors, the world, all gone. There was only motion, weightlessness, and then silence. Now I feel the ship's pulse inside me. It waits. Every time someone new boards, the fog moves, the doors shift, and I watch. I am still here, somewhere in its labyrinth of endless corridors and floating 214 doors. If you ever find yourself on the Ocean Whisperer, wandering alone through the mist, remember this. Some doors should never be opened. Some curiosities are better left untouched, because once the ship notices you, it never forgets. And somewhere in the fog, I can still hear my name being called,